The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody, to tonight's free Mercury Retrograde and Aries webinar sponsored by the Evolutionary Astrology Network. This is your host, Media Monk, and we're pleased that as I watch the board kind of populate with all of our participants tonight, we're pleased to be joined by everybody. It's going to be a lot of details, i.e. Mercury, and maybe a little bit of fire for the next several weeks. If you haven't seen that in the news, I suppose we can talk about that a little later too. So without any further ado, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Kim, and I'll be back in a moment to kind of show some of the newer people their way around the website for a minute or so before we get started with tonight's information. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our free Mercury Retrograde webinar, where we pay it forward to give you a sample of our webinars. I am approaching almost 5 years of doing these public webinars, and it's amazing how fast 5 years went through in space and time. As you can see here, Mercury is going to go retrograde from March 22nd to April 15th. It goes retrograde right at about 17 degrees Aries, all the way back to 5 degrees Aries. Before we get started with our materials, though, we have 2 housekeeping slides for you. Here at EAN, you can study evolutionary astrology with us 3 different ways. We have a free weekly audio podcast that you can tune into from our website or from, I think, iTunes. We have an astro library with 3 sections that you can subscribe to 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. And of course, we have our evolutionary astrology course, and there's 3 different segments. And that coupon is not valid. I didn't see that. We have other things on sale. Sorry, that was when our last slide was going. But we do have these 3 segments here that you can get segments 1 and 2, philosophy and relationships, either materials, or you can get it digital only, or you can get segment 1 and 2 both ways. Health and wellness is only materials. We have not digitized that one yet. And of course, here's what we do have on special for this Mercury retrograde. It's a lot of beginners material. And so what Leroy wants to do is show you from your computer, if I'm understanding Leroy correctly. He was just going to quickly take you to our website and show you how to get to our Learning Paths page, which is beginners.
Thank you, Kim. Yes, and I do want to just kind of reiterate, yes, we do post our free weekly podcasts, which is this link right here for everybody. We do post those podcasts in a couple of ways, actually 2 or 3 ways. But iTunes, you'll just want to go to free audio podcasts in iTunes and search for Star Lady Soul Reader. But the easiest way to get it is just come to the site. See, right here we have the most recent podcast. Right here, you can download it, put it on your iPod, walk your dog, or you can listen to it right here on the site. There's a little bit of a summary of the thing. While you're here, go ahead and put your name and your email address in here if you want to get current astro news delivered right to your inbox. You can also, this RSS feed is a subscription, so if you want to get a little folder on your internet browser where a new podcast, when it's posted, it'll land miraculously right there. You can choose to do that as well. As Kimmery said, we do have some specials on, so newer people to these webinars will want to go to the Learning Paths page for a little more information. Here's our beginner stuff, the Evolutionary Astrology Introductory Workshop. You just click on this orange More Info button. And as you can see, it'll give you a description of the intro workshop. I reduced the price pretty substantially there from $80 to $50 for the full set of online streaming. You'll get all that information archived on your account page indefinitely. Elements and modalities, same way, get more information. And you can see how you can add that to your card as well. And of course, I'm already subscribed to this, so there's the content right there. Same thing will happen to you for $50 should you choose to want to participate in that. Oh gosh, what else should we share, Kim? I think that's pretty good tutorial right now. Those of you that are further advanced might want to tip your toe into segment 1 materials with optional certification program. Again, you do not have to. This is a self-motivated course. You do it at your own time, your own pace. If you do choose certification, you can get the optional certification details right here, the coursework as we call it at EA. We do have a variety of formats for our course materials. You'll see them all right here. You can peruse a little webinar video. You can see the chapter index content of all the DVD video that's, again, streaming video as well in the archives. Over 350 hours now of archive materials on our website. So a lot there. And thank you for letting me give you that quick tutorial on the site. I thought that'd be helpful rather than to talk about it, to kind of show the power of the webinar format. So I'll get this back to Kim, and thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Leroy. So here are the beginner's materials that we are offering on sale that Leroy just showed you how to get there. And I think it's possible that this link will also be live when you get it on your PDF file afterwards. So why planetary retrogrades? They are geocentric or Earth-centered phenomena of apparent motion. And anytime a planet is appearing to be retrograde, in other words, reversing through the sky from its normal direction, it is always closest to Earth, and it just kind of makes it more powerful for us experiencing these planetary retrogrades. And it causes a withdrawal from whatever the status quo is, and has us reviewing and redefining whatever that planetary archetype is according to what our individual natural law is. In other words, it's an opportunity for that planet retrograde in the sky by transit. It's an opportunity for us to break free from consensus conditioning and ask, how do I want to operate with this planetary archetype? So we get to break free and become who we essentially are when we have planetary retrogrades. Of course, if you're born with a planetary retrograde, you're doing that specific planetary archetype or archetypes for an entire lifetime. And when planets go retrograde by transit, which Mercury does 3 to 4 times a year, then we're all doing it together in our own individualistic way. But the point is that when planets are retrograde, we're trying to find answers from ourselves, within ourselves, for ourselves, breaking free into who we essentially are. Now, a retrograde planet is non-static. It's throwing things off, so it's in a perpetual state of evolving. You will look to where that retrograde planet is transiting by sign and house. It will define how that retrograde is going to be manifesting for you personally. And it is the opposite sign and house that is going to give the clarity, the expression, the objectivity to the planetary retrograde. And a transiting retrograde planet is always, always, always related back to the natal planetary archetype. So in regards to Mercury retrograde, where is your natal Mercury? By sign, by house? What are the aspects it's making? As transiting retrograde Mercury is trying to throw things off for you from a mental left brain, conscious mind perspective, it's still going to be evolving your natal Mercury signature as well. Replace any other planet that goes retrograde, Mercury out through Pluto, same thing goes on. If you were born with Mercury retrograde, anytime Mercury is retrograde by transit, you will get a temporary harmony. You will be able to make decisions better. While those who were born with Mercury direct in their natal chart will feel that tension and frustration of the planetary energy not in sync. Astronomy with Mercury, it actually goes around the sun every 88 days. And because the Earth is moving around the sun as well, it will create 3 to 4 retrogrades a day. Mercury is retrograde anywhere from 20 to 24 days, and it usually has a stationary period of 1 day. I like to say the day before, the day of, the day after, Mercury turning retrograde, Mercury turning direct. Those are the time periods where you just want to dot your I's, cross your T's, drive defensively, pay attention to the details as best as you can. Not that you don't do it all the way through Mercury retrograde, but those time periods where it's actually turning direction, retrograde and direct, those are the most intensifying times for a Mercury retrograde cycle. Here's an example of how Mercury would visually look in the sky. You see when it goes from purple to blue, it passes the point where it's going to go direct at the end of the retrograde. This is what we call the pre-shadow with Mercury. Here's where it turns retrograde, appears to stop and then go backwards. Red, this actual Mercury retrograde. And here it comes to the spot where it turns direct. And we have the post shadow of Mercury until it gets to its retrograde point and moves beyond it again. Now, this is not just Mercury. This is any of the planetary retrogrades. That retrograde is 3 chances to get it right. Pre-shadow, retrograde, post-shadow. Even the outer planets like Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that have 5-month retrograde cycles, they also have pre and post retrogrades. Same thing, same principle as this. Now, Mercury's retrograde planet patterns, it cycles reverse through the element. So if you've been an astrologer for a while, you can go fire, earth, air, water, which is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. Well, Mercury reverses through the elements so that it goes water, air, earth, fire. And it will have approximately 1 year and 1 element. Like right now, we've got Mercury retrogrades going on in fire. The last Mercury retrograde was Sagittarius. This Mercury retrograde is Aries. The next Mercury retrograde cycle is going to be Leo. And then at the end of the year, we'll have one that I think is Sag back to Scorpio. And so 1 year and 1 element, and then the next year there's transitioning. So as you can see here, again, 2018 starts in fire, ends in the fire to water element. Next year, we're going to have a fire retrograde, we're going to have a fire to water retrograde, and we're going to have a water retrograde cycle going through. Now, here's another little interesting detail for you. That should say 2018. Okay, got to start my little details here of my little Virgo editing notes. I like to go through every calendar year and just see how many days is Mercury in one of the 4 elements. Look at this. Over half the year, we have Mercury in fire signs, Aries, Leo, Sag. Does that stir things up just by knowing that little detail? And if you took 4 elements and divided it by 12 months, if it was fair, we'd have, 3 months of fire, 3 months of earth, etc. But look at this, 200 days and barely 2 months here. So these 3 elements are all getting shorted so that we can have 6.5 months of Mercury in fire. So that's going to change to 2018, okay? Just this element alone, speaking of elements, can tell you the need to really kind of calm the brain down, to perhaps be able to listen as much as you speak. Fire is the element of spirit and that sense of special destiny, and I just know I got to share everything with you. Everybody else wants to share it right back. As we'll see with Mercury retrograde in Aries, how well can you listen? Now, I always put the generics for Mercury as an archetype here because at this point, in most astrology, Mercury rules two signs. Outer Mercury, which means the active polarity, is also Gemini and third house rulership. Both Mercury's rulerships are conscious mind, left brain. Here with Gemini third house, Mercury wants to classify everything. Facts, words, figures. I've got to figure out the details of language in order to communicate with you. We all have to understand what a cell phone is in order to have a common language of sharing that, no matter which particular language we may speak. Mercury in its rulership, Gemini third house, outer Mercury, is also what we will call that relativity of truth, that Sag polarity, which is the right brain and abstraction and philosophy. Sag will think it knows it all. Gemini comes along and bursts the bubble and exposes the weak link of wherever any personal truth is limited in some way. And of course, you see all kinds of little Gemini third house words there on your screen as well. Now, Mercury's rulership of Virgo in the sixth house is inner Mercury due to the passive polarity. And you can put air and earth elements into it as well for Gemini and Virgo. We're still conscious mind, left brain here, but now Mercury is gaining that ability to analyze, to adapt, to reason, to work through all of our purifications and self-improvement issues. There's a different flavor to Mercury here in passive mutable earth. In evolutionary astrology, the archetypes of Virgo 6th and Pisces 12th are very much linked to the patriarchal distortions of sadomasochism. Basically, the religious conditionings that God is perfect and humans are imperfect. It's easy to see we're imperfect and therefore feel guilty. Guilt linked to atonement is the victim or the masochist. Guilt linked to anger is the victor or the sadist. And what we learn through all of the mutable modality, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, Pisces, is in natural law. Observe, correlate. Source itself is not perfect. Why would perfection create a mess? We're on a grand evolutionary journey together, co-creating with universe, however you perceive it. And every time you make a baby step forward, source itself evolves. The other thing that is relative here to this inner Mercury and ruling Virgo in the sixth house, this is where we are making the shift from self to other. First six archetypes, Aries through Virgo is self. Second six archetypes, Libra through Pisces is other. So Virgo 6 is a transitional archetype where we're moving from ourself to other. So we have to learn how to be of service to another or society. We have to learn what it is we adjust about ourselves in order to learn how to go into Libra next, seventh house, and learn how to be an equal in relationships. And of course, you see more keywords right there on your screen with some of the Mercury archetypes. Now, Mercury retrograde in general, it's a time period to release excess thought. Mind is saturated, hard to process information and ideas, so we've got to let some stuff go mentally in order to take in new ideas or new ways to process information or be able to move forward and think differently. It's a natural time period to turn inward and quiet our mind, perhaps get in nature or unplug yourself from electronica. Again, you're learning to think for yourself, and you're wanting to learn to trust your intuition first, Sag, and let logic and facts follow through second, Virgo, Gemini. When Mercury's retrograde, the left brain is pointing to the right brain. And we know this because Mercury's rulership of Gemini pointing to the polarity Sag and its ruler Jupiter. Mercury's rulership of Virgo points to the polarity Pisces and ruler Neptune. These are conscious beliefs and our deepest layers of unconscious beliefs. So any Mercury retrograde has the mutable quadrant in your chart by sign and house very activated. You can extrapolate the Mercury retrogrades just to see how it's affecting where these 4 mutable signs fall in your chart. If you have planets in the mutable houses, how are they being activated? So, Mercury retrograde, finding the quiet time in the busyness of a retrograde overload. I have Sun conjunct Mercury conjunct Neptune within 2 degrees of each other. Scorpio, 9th house. But they're within 2 degrees of each other. And I have been studying astrology for 35 years. And I can just feel Mercury retrograde. I don't have any of them retrograde natally. They're all direct. I can feel that Mercury energy creating busyness and chaos. And so sometimes it really takes me, 9th house, stellium, those walks in nature to just get, to just find the priorities through the busyness that'll come up with emails and phone calls or readings or family or moving a kid out of state, which is what we're doing with this Mercury retrograde cycle. You also, though, will have to make time for extra communications. You know, 3 chances to get it right, pre-shadow, post-shadow with Mercury retrograde. You may have to have the conversation at least 3 times to really get to mutual clarity with whomever you're speaking with. And then, of course, again, all those details in our world. Mercury has co-rulership of electronics and technology with Uranus. And so, of course, it involves our cell phones, our computers, our cars, our lawnmowers, you know, our snowmobiles up here yet, as we received another 10 inches of snow last weekend. So, especially when it turns retrograde and direct, those 3 days, day before, day of, day after, paying attention, you know, details, details, details. Sometimes you got to do things more than once to really integrate it. And sometimes you have to slow down and take the time to do it correctly versus glossing over it and going, oh, I'll fix that detail later. No, Mercury retrograde is the time to fix the details. It is the time for a reading. It is the time to edit whatever you're writing. You know, it is the time to put that energy into fine-tuning and correcting something. And all of this is to help Mercury gain the best clarity on how we want to move forward, thinking, communicating, processing information in our world. Now, here's the dates for the Mercury retrograde again. I usually go from an exterior conjunction when Mercury's direct on the far side of the sun all the way through to the next one. Mercury and Venus have interior conjunctions. They have 2 of them in any cycle, one when they're moving direct and one when they're retrograde. It is Mars outward that has an opposition to the sun when they're retrograde because their orbits are beyond Pluto and they can be on either side of planet Earth with the sun and Earth in the middle. As you saw on your screen earlier, Mercury never gets more than 29 degrees beyond elongation to the sun from our Earth perspective, which is why whatever your sun sign is, Mercury's going to be the sign before, the sign of, or the sign after. Venus can go up to 48 degrees elongation, so Venus can go 2 signs before, sun sign, same sign, or 2 signs after your sun sign. Here's the pre-shadow dates, the first passage right here. Here we are getting ready to go retrograde as of Thursday, the week of this phone call. The interior conjunction to the sun is the halfway point of the retrograde. Here it will be April Fool's Day, Easter Sunday at about 12 degrees Aries. And of course you see how it goes direct. And here's the dates for the post-shadow as well. Here's a chart for Mercury turning stationary retrograde. As I teach so many webinars all over planet Earth, I don't put a chart to a specific city. I like to use 0 degrees Aries when I use generic charts, so we see the planets in their natural houses that relate to the sign. Here's what's interesting about this Mercury retrograde. It's going to aspect 6 planets and the nodal axis. As you can see in this interior retrograde, we have the base node of Uranus, Pluto within orb of the square. I think they'll be within orb one more year, 2019. They got within about 5 degrees this winter. I think they'll be within about 8 degrees next year, early 2019. But as you can see, we have these 3 squares going on. So this Mercury turning retrograde here at the end of this week, again, there can be tension, there can be frustration. I mean, Aries just wants the charge and drive forward, and anything perceived as a limitation just increases a sense of frustration. We happen to have a young adult who's a first house Pluto, Aries soul, with a south node in Aries. And he doesn't have Mercury retrograde, but he does have it conjunct a node and square planets. And we just joke how doesn't matter what he's going to do, it's going to happen Mercury retrograde. We could plan till the cows come home, as we say in the Northern Plains, and it would still happen Mercury retrograde. We were supposed to move him last week before the retrograde, and then the storm came. So now my sweetie pie, wrapped in white light, as well as my son, driving 2 vehicles down on Mercury. Breaths. Pacing ourselves. Sometimes just going with the flow. You know, we can try as much as we want to not do it during a Mercury retrograde, and it just happens. You know, for instance, someone who has Mercury retrograde by natal chart, I can think of 2 people in my life. One's a friend and one's a family member. Gosh darn it, if they haven't changed jobs during Mercury retrogrades, they lose a job during Mercury retrograde, they gain a job during Mercury retrograde, and they have Mercury retrograde natally. So guess what? Go for it, you guys. This is the time period to do it if you have natal Mercury retrograde. You don't necessarily have to slow it down so much as the rest of us Mercury direct people do. But even Mercury direct people, you just have things that come up with life, and you pace yourself, and you move through it as gracefully as Mercury can do. So remember I said Mercury fire signs, 6.5 months. The fire signs, they want to stir up the communications and the arguments. They increase patience, especially here with Aries, a refusal or inability to listen. Sag, we get defensive about beliefs. It's a time period to review the larger picture. It's also a time period to review lies versus truth debates. Again, Mercury ruling Gemini, 3rd with polarity. Sag ninth. While that polarity rules truth versus lies, all 12 archetypes can lie. All 12 archetypes can tell the truth. Here's the dates that Mercury is completely, I forgot to change my Sagittarius too. Here's the dates that from the last retrograde. Mercury's in Aries. See how my Mercury is just like the Roy sometimes goes, Kim Marie, nobody would notice it if you didn't say anything. Mercury, as it's retrograde in any one of these fire signs, spends 2 months there. Typically, when Mercury is full speed ahead, direct, traveling through a sign of the zodiac, 2 weeks. 2 weeks versus 2 months when it's retrograde. Just that detail, Mercury alone, can tell you how much we've got to handle any particular sign when it's going through a retrograde in a complete sign. Mercury retrograde in Aries, reactions of impatience, frustration, arguments. There can be extremes of anger, rage, violence, and impulsive acts going on. All of us. I mean, Leroy and I have been joking for the last week or week and a half. One day it'll be him. Just boom, something triggers him and beep, 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 beep. The other day, it's not him, it's me. Something said, trigger, beep, 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 beep. And we'll all feel this spontaneously just coming out of us. You know how much effort it takes to count to 10 or 12 or 20 and to stop and think before speaking or before jumping in or before taking action or taking the baseball bat to the pillow, as I like to say? You won't, I mean, all you'll have to do is look around you and see it going on. So, you know, if you want to put your white, purple, blue light around you to have your little bubble of safety, very okay to do that with Mercury retrograde in Aries. It's all about learning considered actions versus impulsive actions. Mars, ruling Aries and the first house, is that leading edge of our conscious desire. It's the baby of the zodiac. It's initiation. It is instinctively acting and becoming in whatever way we want to go. It's action to get the feedback, reaction to then know how to make the next action. Well, when Mercury's retrograde in Aries, it's slowing down the actions. It's processing through things before you decide which way you're going to move. I initiate with consideration of others. Now, Mercury retrograde in Aries, Aries having, again, that co-rulership of our conscious desire nature, what instinctively is coming out of us. This is going to be a natural time period to review and release old, exhausted desires. Been there, done that. I just don't want to do this anymore. This doesn't have meaning or value to me anymore. How do I release this social cause that I've been involved in for the last 10 years? How do I release this particular relationship that doesn't have value or meaning for me anymore? Whatever it is, whatever the old desire is. It's also a time period to change our attitudes about our desire nature. Let me just say, in natural law, we exhaust the separating desires, and as we naturally fulfill the desire and release it, eventually the returning desire, why am I here? What is my purpose? Becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Then eventually you become a Jesus, a yoga, a Buddha, and the returning desire becomes the only desire left. But if we could pray ourselves perfect, we'd all have instant nirvana. How many of you can do that? So we have to learn that it's natural. I exist. I have a desire. And it's natural to achieve it and then release it. And this is really going to be a way in which we can become more conscious about those desires we want to release. We also are going to be opening up to newly evolving desires. And again, they can be new separating desires, okay? Doesn't matter. It can be a returning desire. It doesn't matter. It's what's the next step on our evolutionary path that's working for us. What are the old desires to release? What are the new desires instinctively coming forward? And how is Mercury retrograde processing through all this information? Are you listening to what's coming through on an intuitive basis in regards to your desires? Mercury retrograde in Aries can create identity crises. And what happens many times, Aries, me, you know, my stuff, my desires, my ways. I want all the freedom in the world. I'm bursting forth, Aries. Retrograde, it runs into the Libra 7th house polarity. And many times Mercury retrograde in Aries will run into that other that has more power than it does. And so it'll have us going, oh, wait a minute. I thought I had my stuff put together. I thought I had me put together. Oh, do I? I don't know about this. I better think about this. And it can create all kinds of things, which we'll look at with the Libra polarity here. But we can also have the need for freedom to evolve, meeting the insecurity of the unknown. All of us have a tendency to project past forward because it's secure. All of us will move forward to the degree we feel secure, and when we feel insecure, it kind of stops us in our tracks. Do I have the courage to go into the unknown? Can I move through the insecurity? Mercury retrograde is going to intensify this. And so what happens, this Aries archetype naturally vacillates between feeling all powerful and superhuman, I can do it, Aries, and powerless or powered over, Libra polarity. And so Mercury retrograde here is going to intensify all this information, and all of us can vacillate between feeling good and feeling not so good. And what happens is it can create a loss of perspective about ourselves that then turns us inward, that implosion. We can explode with Aries, but we can also implode. And so this is a natural time period for Aries reflections, to go inward upon ourselves. Mercury does it naturally retrograde, and in Aries, go inward. What about me? What do I need to consider about myself? What do I need to know about myself? How do I clarify my own thoughts so that I can then have clearer actions and a more clear understanding of my own self-identity? Now, here again, these implosions, which have us self-reflect, they can be initiated by ourselves over some type of crises about ourselves. They can be initiated by others to enforce that Libra 7th house equality and balance. Excuse my burp. So Aries can't just go outward from, itself and have complete and utter freedom forever. It's going to run into the universe. And so the universe is always going to provide any necessary limitations and feedback to help Aries focus its initiation process. That initiation to instinctively act upon our desires and to move forward. And so that limitation, that feedback from the universe. That's the Mercury retrograde review in Aries. And again, helping us clarify our desires and evolving, achieving those desires in harmony with others. Because while this is all about me, guess what, Libra polarity? Everybody else is doing the same thing. Everybody else wants their freedom. Everybody else wants to discover who they are. Everybody else wants to create their own desires. And everybody else has to go through the feedback from the universe, including us as well. Now remember, any planetary retrograde by sign points to the opposite sign. Wherever your Aries is by house, Mercury retrograde will point to that opposite house. So with the Libra polarity here, there's a lesson in learning the psychology of listening. And that includes inwardly listening to our own self and our own thoughts, listening to what higher source is saying to us through our intuition or our dreams or spontaneous messages that arrive up into consciousness. And it's also outwardly listening to what's coming at us from others in the universe. And then as we are really taking time to slow down and listen, it doesn't mean we can't speak. If you're a little bit on the shy side, you have to learn how to speak up when necessary as well. If you have a situation with a friend where the friend does 80% of the talking while you do 20%, that's a lesson for you to speak up. And maybe Mercury retrograde might be a time period to say something to that friend. I'm going to set my clock and you get to talk for 5 minutes. And when my buzzer goes off, you have to be quiet for 5 minutes. So the Mercury retrograde with the Libra polarity is pointing to the principle of relativity. We don't operate in Aries isolation. Relativity is relationships. It's through bouncing ourselves off of someone else that we learn about ourselves, that we see ourselves reflected. Remember how what they're always saying about relationships? Well, that partner is just a mirror to yourself. You're attracted to what's missing within you. All the little things that you hear about that, again, it's that give and take in the whole relationship scenario that we learn about ourselves. And so it's through all these relationships that get stirred up during Mercury retrograde in Aries that we're going to have a broader understanding of ourselves and our own individuality, especially in relationship to the people in our lives. This helps us become more objective about ourselves and more objectively aware of ourselves versus that Aries subjectiveness. And it also helps us then become more objectively aware of other people. And that then allows us to address any areas of inequality in our life. Learning to be fair, equal, balanced. And this can include learning when to give, learning when not to give, and when that not giving is the greater giving. You know, the helicopter parent who wants to just do everything for the child rather than let the child learn how to fall off the bike and skin their knees and learn to be a little more careful riding the bike. Can go through into adult relationships as well. There's all kinds of variables about this. And as we learn to address more and more equality in our life, what we're learning, Mercury retrograde, Aries, Libra polarity, is essentially We survive better together. There's a reason why most species have evolved into 2 genders. It increases the rate of survival. It evolves the immune system faster than a single gender that replicates itself identically. 2 people having a baby, baby never turns out exactly like either parent, does it? A little bit of this one, a little bit of that one, and then sometimes they come in and you go, I had nothing to do with that. I might have given birth to this person. I don't know where that's coming from. But we do learn that, hey, Libra polarity, how do I get along with others? How do I play in the same sandbox? Finally, also, with the Aries Libra polarity, this Mercury retrograde, you want to be gaining that intuitive awareness of when you need to be alone by yourself and when you need to socialize with others. Some of us may be more naturally a loner. Some of us may be more naturally social butterflies. However, we all have to learn to balance within ourselves when to relate to ourselves and when to relate to others. It's a natural ebb and flow that we call living life. All right, I'm talking away here. I got to take a drink of water. Any comments or questions, you're welcome to always just type them into the Q&A board. Leroy answers as best as he can. He interrupts me, and we interrupt the my chatty Cathy when we need to. So as you can see here on your screen, Mercury moves so fast. It is always aspecting several planets during its retrograde cycles. And evolutionary astrology uses the 360-degree cycle of phases and aspects to recognize how active Mercury really is in any retrograde cycle. I'll show you what I mean here in a moment. But here is a slide for you in regards to the cycle of phases and aspects. This slide was originally in Dane Rudier's book, The Lunation Cycle. It was then adopted by Jeffrey Green when he brought forth his method of evolutionary astrology. And I ran across this 30-some years ago when I first started studying astrology. And when you learn how to compare a faster moving planet to the slower moving planet and recognize there's a crescent square first quarter disseminating and last quarter square, there's 4 squares, there's 2 oppositions. It just opens up a whole world of expanding interpretation for you. That's one of those workshops we have on sale, the cycle of phases and aspects. I've been, again, working with this concept for a while, and it can really deepen and broaden your ability with astrological interpretations when you recognize this. Here's Mercury's retrograde aspects. All of them are 3 times except for Venus. Mercury makes 5 different aspects to Venus during this retrograde cycle, 2 conjunctions, and then it falls 30 degrees behind Venus as it's this beautiful evening star in the sky right now. Mercury's there. I hope some of you got to see Moon, Mercury, Venus in the evening sky the last few days or so. We've had clouds. We didn't get to see it yesterday. We aren't going to be able to see it tonight. That's good. Now I won't be so disappointed being on my, tied to my computer rather than looking at the evening sky at the most opportune times. So I hope some of you have been able to go out there and see how beautiful it is right now tonight. You may know Mercury's making waxing squares to Mars and to Saturn, but did you know Mercury's making 3 waxing sesquisquadrates to Pluto? It's making 3 waxing semi-sextiles to Neptune. These are both minor aspects that, in regards to sesquisquadrate, is really not so minor. Well, I'm going to go through these quickly for you, okay? Here is Mercury retrograde's interior conjunction to the sun. This is one of the planets it aspects. Remember, it's the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde cycle. I tell people, if you're getting really impatient about being able to make a decision, if you can at least wait till Mercury reverses back over the sun at the interior conjunction and then go forward the second half of that retrograde cycle, at least you might be able to save yourself a few hiccups waiting till the interior conjunction or after. Wanted to point out that this entire Mercury retrograde cycle is defined by Aries and Capricorn. See these 3 powerhouses up here in Capricorn? And we'll have a slide on this, but you see at the interior conjunction how close Mars is to Saturn and how closely square the interior conjunction. There is just going to be all the way through the rest of March and April, struggles over who gets to be in power, who gets to be in control. And it's really about fairness and equality. That when you look at all the patriarchal distortions we have on planet Earth, and you look at it from some political perspective, especially from, say, the United States perspective, it's not about fairness. It's not about honesty and truth. It's about distorting the words and playing games so that the end justifies the means. And who cares whether or not you destroy the basic structures of the country or the few game it at the expense of the masses. Do you know in the United States there are 3 individuals who have as much money as the bottom half of the US? We're about 330 million people right now. So that means about 165 million people have as much wealth as Jeff Bezos, Amazon, Bill Gates, Microsoft, and Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway. That is extreme inequality. And there's going to be a few days of reckoning coming one way or another. You just look through history. Sooner or later, enough of the masses say it needs to be a little more equitably shared. Here's Mercury falling behind Venus, the 5 aspects that I showed you. Mercury always has aspects to Venus. And when Venus starts to move ahead of Mercury, it's always about forcing our mind to support the needs and wants important to Venus. Venus is leading the inner planets right now. Venus is just, well, you can see it. They're together in the sky. So it's slightly ahead of Mercury. And as you can see right here, March 19th. Oh, that's today. That's the day we're recording. They're conjunct in the sky, and Venus pulls ahead of Mercury. Okay. And so Mercury's like, this is what I value. This is what I need. Aries desires, let's go get this. And Mercury's having to say, oh, but wait a minute. I don't know. I don't know if that's really what I value. I don't know if I want to put my energy in that direction. Or if we impulsively do, we sign the dotted line and pay credit for something and go, ooh, I don't know if I want to be stuck with this bill. What did I do? And again, Mercury is either always ahead or behind of Venus. And right now it's ahead. Venus is going to be ahead of it the next retrograde cycle in Leo. And then the retrograde cycle in Sag Scorpio later this year. Venus will be just starting to come off of its retrograde cycle or be in the middle of its retrograde cycle. Oh, here it is. Venus is retrograde October 5th through November 16th. And the day Venus goes direct, Mercury goes retrograde November 16th through December 6th. So this year, Venus ahead of Mercury. And it's okay for Mercury to say, wait a minute, Venus, I got to think on this. I got to take a little time. I got to ponder this. And if it's really, really important, we'll do it direct. And it's okay to do that. Mercury is ahead of Mars, as you saw with the visuals so far, okay? Mercury is making 3 waxing squares to Mars. And I wanted to put this in here for you as well. The end of April, and I'll speak more here on the middle to end part of April in a couple of slides, but Mars is going to catch up to Pluto, and they're going to have their conjunction together April 26th on the exact degree and minute that Pluto's going to go retrograde April 22nd. Now, Mars, leading edge of conscious desires in evolutionary astrology. Pluto is the soul and its unconscious desire nature. So Mars, Pluto have a specific relationship with our desire nature. Separating desires, returning desires, exhaustion of the separating desires until the returning desire becomes more and more conscious, stronger and stronger, and buku lifetimes later, the only desire we have left to merge back to source. What will happen with Mercury retrograde and Mars sign? That urge to act is going to be very, very strong. And it will increase the sense of frustration. And when Aries gets frustrated, it just wants to release energy. So this can create some impulsive communications. It can create interrupting the other person, being interrupted. It can create a lot of arguments. It can create some screaming and yelling matches. It can create battling it out for control and who gets to have the upper hand and power. How will this happen personally for you? How is this going to happen on collective levels in whatever part of the world you happen to be living in? It will signify a need to really listen inward, outward. Take some time to ponder, count to 10, count to 100, sleep on it, and then act. If over time it continues to seem or feel or intuit like the right thing to do. And what Mercury is intending to do here with Mars, and especially as Mars initiates, Mars is 2 years around the zodiac. So Mars is going to initiate a 2-year cycle of our conscious desire nature with Pluto. And so Mercury can be really good here if we do slow down and help us clarify with what we really desire on some of the deepest soul levels. Mercury is a waxing sesquisquadrate to Jupiter. Can you say that one 3 times? A sesquisquadrate. I've had a few years to practice. Sesquisquadrate is a square and a half. And the happy little slide that I showed you of the 360 circle, it's where the faster moving planet moves from first quarter to gibbous phase if the slower moving planet is the 0 degree mark. And first quarter, we didn't point that out, but you know, the 8 phases, energy moving out, energy moving in, energy moving out, energy moving in, that go back and forth between yang and yin phases. First quarter's yang, gibbous is yin. And it emphasizes turning inward. It emphasizes an implosion, energy moving back to center. And so, remember Mercury, left brain, Gemini, Jupiter, right brain, Sag. Here they are in a specific relationship to each other that does not even show up in your astrological calendars. If we went through all the different aspects, our calendars would get 3 times as big. But I do advocate that from Jupiter on out, we need to start using some of these minor aspects with slower moving planets. This is emphasizing the need to start considering the other. First quarter is crises in action. I've got to manifest it. As it moves into gibbous phase, that's where we're having to start to have more and more consideration of somebody else to get to the opposition phase, the Libra, equality with others. So this is where we've got to consider the other, take feedback from the other, listen to the other. It also will require us to listen to our own intuition on deep, deep levels. We're talking Jupiter and Scorpio here. It's in its natural 12th house if you start with its rulership of Sag. And Jupiter in Scorpio is a psychological detective, and it has a very, very good BS meter. Anybody familiar with that word by some high school students in the US? BS. Here's your own BS meter coming out. How well can you listen to yourself? Where is somebody calling you out on your BS? How do you want to call somebody else out? What we have to watch out for is getting into a lot of arguments over wanting to control any subject because of insecurity and fears. The distortions of Jupiter and Scorpio, I got to have the power and the upper hand as well. I have to have the emotional power in order to feel emotionally secure. So Mercury's in the sign that Mars rules, and Jupiter's in the sign that Pluto rules. There's all that desire stuff again coming up. How's your desires changing for you? And if you're not listening, these aspects will force one of those implosions to come forward in order to really move things into more and more equality. Mercury is also waxing squares to Saturn. Remember, Mars is just creeping towards Saturn and Pluto. Well, Mars's conjunction to Saturn is April 2nd. Remember, April 1st, the interior conjunction of Mercury, Sun, 12 degrees Aries. The next day, Mars conjunct Saturn at 9 degrees Capricorn. You know, this is also where we've just got to search for what is truth for us and then become responsible with it and decide how we're going to move forward. There's a lot of energy from this Mars, Saturn, Pluto really trying to push us forward and really wanting us to have the control and the power. And again, with what we see going on planet Earth, you know, truth is the last thing that is looked at. And yet, I was having this interesting discussion with my young adult nephew today, you know, about truth versus lies and how it all takes place out there politically. And, you know, he was actually asking me, you know, what sources of media do you trust to give you the actual facts of any matter? Capricorn, reality, facts. So Mercury retrograde, are you instinctively recognizing what's real for you? What is the broadest understandings of truth you know versus Capricorn consensus conditionings? The distortions here, I'm going to cling to my version of the truth to feel secure. And we talked about that one too. He says, isn't it funny? Do you notice how people just seem to be orientated toward what makes them feel good? What makes them feel secure versus being willing to be open-minded? This is my nephew with a bunch of Aries in his chart. I was getting ready for Mercury retrograde in Aries, and I thought, oh, he's already pondering this kind of stuff and recognizing what's going on. So Mars with Saturn, self-responsibility with our desire nature. How are you going forward with that Mercury waxing square Saturn? Can you be ultimately responsible for yourself? Can you stand in the truth as well as you can discern it? There can be a lot of shenanigans going on, everybody, over this Mercury retrograde. There can also be a lot of those who will stand up to the power under any circumstances and say, that's a lie, and it's not going to work anymore. Look at these young ones in the US with the whole issue of gun control. Well, that was the other thing we talked about with my nephew, because he's studying to be a cop. And, you know, we had a real good gun debate. And even studying to be a cop. I says, do you want to be out there having to protect somebody, and some individual has the right to have a weapon of war in their home on the street? Well, it was a very good conversation. Oh, I wanted to put this one in here from the last Mercury retrograde, because the last Mercury retrograde in Sag, it had the 3 conjunctions to Saturn. I didn't put the date in, but I just thought, this is interesting. Collective lies versus truth. And look at these things on your screen. The last time we talked about how the Trump administration was gutting so many collective social support systems, and I had mentioned Vanity Fair's article, Michael Lewis articles. Just go to vanityfair.com and research Michael Lewis articles. Great articles on all these big federal departments and how they're just being utterly gutted by the Trump administration. And the proposed tax cuts, which were now passed, which, by the way, are actually taking $1 trillion from Medicaid and $500 billion from Medicare over the next 10 years, while we have just entered into 1 to 1.5 trillion adding to the debt each and every year with this administration. You know, the Republicans, when a Democrat's in control, debt, 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 debt. Now all of a sudden they have the presidency in both branches of Congress, and the Republicans don't care how far in debt they go. But of course, the real thing underneath there, the real Saturn-Pluto control thing, is all the money you want for the military, but we don't have enough for our social structures or our social nets in the US. And I thought, isn't that interesting? That Mercury was conjunct the last retrograde cycle in Sag, and now here it is, first quarter square Saturn. And what will be coming from this? Will people be recognizing this? Will they be figuring out how the Republicans just gutted so much of fiscal responsibility with this tax cut, while they gave themselves, every single person on Trump's cabinet is getting millions of dollars in tax cuts on their taxes. if not hundreds of millions for the billionaires on his cabinet, which includes Trump and his family. Here's the other aspect that's not in the calendars. Mercury is moved 30 degrees beyond Neptune, waxing semi-sextiles, Aries to Pisces. So anything that we've been reflecting upon through Mercury in Pisces, okay, Jan, Feb, it's conjunction to Neptune. I don't remember the exact date or degree, but it's going to be somewhere around 13, 14 degrees Pisces where Neptune is. Any personal reflections on spirituality and religion now at the 30-degree mark, beyond, new phase, 30 degrees, we've got to learn to act upon our beliefs. Now, Mercury retrograde will still be pondering them. And then as Mercury turns stationary direct and moves forward through the rest of Aries all over again, the month of April, that'll be the time period where we really have to act upon what our deepest beliefs are. And if we're not, if we're going to distort it, you know, we'll get into that argumentativeness again, Mercury retrograde Aries, or Pisces will avoid the communications. We don't want to speak up about it. We'll pretend this isn't happening. What so many do in the consensus world. This aspect is where it's important for us to intend to be in the world what we wish to see in the world. So again, as we get to the second half of Mercury retrograde and Mercury direct and Mercury moving forward on its annual cycle with Neptune, we really have to walk our talk with this aspect. And Mercury's about clarifying that for us. Nodal axis. You compare the nodes to the planet. So you start with Mercury, and because the nodes reverse through the zodiac, their mean motion is retrograde. You go clockwise through the zodiac and houses. The north node is making a waning trine to Mercury. The south node is making a waxing sextile to Mercury. So the south node has some potential to search for objectivity and truth, south node in Aquarius. And the north node has some potential for creative breakthroughs, Leo. A lot of inspired action and creativity, Leo to Aries. Now, one of the other things that can happen here is both of these nodes can get stuck in class warfare and inequality. We get emotionally fearful, nodes of the moon, or insecure, nodes of the moon. And then, no, I don't want to share. I don't want to do what's fair, Aquarius, for all concerned. Leo and Aquarius, Leo's royalty, Aquarius is upper class. Aquarius can be all of the above. It can be lower class, middle class, upper class, but it does have a traditional association with the upper classes and elitism, and Leo with, you know, direct or indirect royalty, running in royal classes, running in upper classes. It's all stirred up right now with the nodes in Leo, Aquarius, and you know, for instance, again, you see these young high school children really finding their Aquarian inspiration to be a part of change in regards to gun control. You will see all kinds of things going on. So Mercury can spark some really good conversations here, but it can also have some people dig their heels in, I'm right, you're wrong, and you just need to do as I say. Here's Mercury direct, April 15th. which is a new moon. Here's all the Aries, Capricorn squares again. As you can see, when Mercury turns direct, Mars has moved beyond Saturn, and it's halfway between the two. Here's what happens in April. I just kept that Mars-Saturn conjunction in here in early April, but Mercury turns direct on a new moon at about 26 degrees Aries. A couple of days later, Chiron goes into Aries, starting a brand new cycle of hopefully healing. Saturn turns retrograde later on in the same day at 9 degrees Capricorn. Pluto turns retrograde a week later at Capricorn, and right after that, Mars conjuncts Pluto. So here's a little bit of calendar time for you, sandwiched right in Mercury direct April 15th. So we might think it's a little excitable with Mercury turning retrograde. Here's where the real excitement comes. Here's where the real battles start to get defined over who's going to win out the spin cycle, who's going to win out with the truth, who's going to break free from Capricornian control, who's going to be trying to initiate Mercury direct new moon. Look at Mars there, or excuse me, Uranus there, still at 28 degrees Aries. Who's going to be trying to initiate even more power and more control? You know, I think a lot of the 1%, a lot of the political powers, especially for the US, they're realizing it's their last gasp. That's why they passed the tax plan they did. They're trying to grab as much of the resources as they can. Money in their pocket, privatizing of public structures. There's a new onslaught, by the way, to privatize the post office in the United States. It has always been self-sufficient, but oh gosh, what was it? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they passed this arcane law that the post office had to fund its pension and health care for its employees 75 years in advance. So all this pension money and post office money is being stockpiled away in the post office. So it looks like it's going red. What are they doing? Robbing that like they did Social Security so it balances the books in some way? It's amazing the number of countries that use the post office as a postal bank, postal savings bank. Japan, China, Switzerland, all kinds of countries, and what it provides is a completely inexpensive way for the lower class to have a means of cashing a paycheck. And what all of our too big to fail banks do is attach on all these fees if you don't have an account with them, or if you don't keep X amount of dollars in your account every month. They start charging all these fees. And there's this, you know, recurring battle to try and privatize the US Post Office. And as we've ordered more and more off of the internet, it has increased the profits for the post office. But it doesn't show that on paper because of having to fund pensions and health care for its workers at outrageous amounts. And now you have Amazon going into competition with UPS and the post office to deliver its own packages, so that income that the post office has had for the last 5 to 10 years is going to be going away. Interesting subject that you can Google. My heroine, Ellen Brown, webofdebt.com. It's one of her most recent articles if you want to go inform yourself about it. Which, by the way, we had our post offices in the United States act as banks for almost 100 years. Didn't know that one, did you? Go research that. webofdebt.com, the blog articles. So this time period is going to really stir things up. You can look maybe the whole month of April, maybe just the second half as you look at those dates going on. How's it going to turn out? Time will tell. It's going to depend on all kinds of individual and collective forces. I use the Gemini rising chart for July 4th at 2:13 a.m. You can use the Sibley chart for 5:10 p.m. Both charts will have Mercury retrograde in Aries opposing the U.S., Saturn in Libra 3 times, while Mercury in Aries squares both Jupiter and Sun in Cancer 3 times. So this square between Cancer Libra that exists in the U.S. July 4th chart, do we include or do we exclude? Are we fair or are we protectionistic? Looking at distortions of these two archetypes. Mercury's going to be activating a T-square that says me first, and the real thought is how do we figure it out for all of us together so that everybody feels and is secure. In Gemini rising, these Cancer planets are in the second house of survival. How do we take care of food, clothing, and shelter for all citizens? How do we help all our citizens to fish versus just give them a fish? How do we help them with the helping hand up? Stay tuned. We'll see. Here's Trump's chart. I really didn't think Trump anything was going on in his chart. I was so tuned into the, Gemini Sag and the Leo Aquarius of the eclipses. And I went, oh, wait a minute. He's got planets in Cancer. Remember I said these Aries Capricorn squares are active all the way through this retrograde? Well, Mercury retrograde is going to oppose Trump's moon. It's going to make a last quarter square to his natal Mercury. It will trine his Pluto. And it will oppose his Chiron 3 times. But the real biggie is that, again, Aries and Capricorn. Aries will be opposing the Libra stuff in Trump's chart. Capricorn will be opposing the Cancer stuff in Trump's chart. It's like the power struggles are intensifying, and it can be all of the prior actions of control might really be revealed in some way. We can see more of his family members continuing to be in different types of financial trouble as much as anything else. One of the things that, I don't know if I said it on podcast or not, but I know I've said it to Leroy. Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was really involved in the digital campaign for Trump's presidency. And it just came out in the news today that this firm that they hired trolled 50 million Facebook users' information to influence the vote. I swear Kushner was in cahoots with some of these, Russian trolls as well. There's more. I think it's heating up. Far be it for me to predict. I don't think there'll be any impeachments unless there's a landslide in the midterm elections come November. But it's heating up. And if you just look at this chart, you can see the intensity of it. And it also had me reflecting a little bit on this whole Mercury in Cancer square to Trump's natal Neptune in Libra. And it is, retrograde, but Mercury Neptune can be confused thinking. They can be caught up in illusions and delusions or fantasies. Mercury Neptune can believe their own words. If I say it, it's true. And that came out in the news. We watched something on TV in the last week or so, and somebody reported Trump saying, if you say it, they'll believe it. Mercury squared Neptune. What's he going to say next? You know that old saying, you can fool some of the people all the time. You can fool all the people some of the time. However, you cannot fool all the people all the time. that's this Mercury Neptune for me, which again has it pretty activated. So here's another Mercury retrograde cycle that just continues to put a little bit of pressure on Donald, to be honest, to be fair and equal, to take responsibility for his actions, or to maybe have the falls from grace from prior actions that were less than ethical. Stay tuned. We'll see what happens. Mercury retrograde in Aries. How well can I slow down and pace myself in the world? How often can I stop, breathe, and listen? How are my relationships evolving? Where do I find the courage to speak up when necessary? How do I act with consideration of others? Where do I need to initiate my leadership courage? What do I really want in life? Here are the next 3 Mercury retrogrades for you. I didn't get this date changed. I was going to set up a date. I'll set up another date and get that in there for us for the next Mercury retrograde. But you've got some dates and degrees for yourself if you want to write Mercury retrograde in your calendar. My family doesn't follow astrology very well, not at all. But I have a mother and 2 sisters who actually write Mercury retrogrades in their calendars. That's how much they've been interacting with me. I think this Saturn and Capricorn series code might still be active. I just finished up Chiron in Aries for those of you who may be interested in it. I really was happy with how the archetypes and cycles turned out. Chiron goes into Aries April 17th for the next 8 years. It will retrograde back into Pisces, but we got Chiron in Aries, 8 years. Stay tuned. It is going to pick up and kick things off where Mercury retrograde, whatever Mercury retrograde initiated. The last time Chiron was in Aries, we had a lot of social justice marching in the streets. I really think it's going to happen again as well. Here's my next series. Just going to start this one up next week. Same thing. We're going to do part 1, Uranus and Taurus archetypes and cycles. And then we'll start a part 2 where we look at Uranus and Taurus transiting through all 12 houses. I still have openings for these. If you want to enroll in Uranus and Taurus part 2, you can volunteer your chart to be, you must attend the class live, you must interact with me, do feedback, and you have to enroll. So you enroll, I'll check to see if the house is open, first come, first serve, and we'll use some actual chart examples for people wanting to learn more astrology or clients wanting to have the reference Uranus and Taurus the next 7 years. When slower moving planets change archetypes, change signs of the zodiac, it shakes everything up for all of us. And Uranus and Taurus will shake things up financially. I will also give a lot of hope and choices for how we can create prosperity for all through this series. Finally, whenever I do a Mercury retrograde, I give you a listing in chronological order of any of the aspects that I spoke about. And then you've got a reference to see all of the different Mercury retrograde aspects that will take place. All right, thank you all very much. This was my last slide. Leroy, any comments or questions?
I will add that, yes, that coupon code is good. It's Saturn, Saturn. Apply that for any forecasting or any educational webinar on either of those pages. That's going to be good only for the next 2 or 3 days. I think it expires at midnight on Thursday, Mercury retrograde. Thursday it ends the 22nd of March. So enter coupon code Saturn. You can get that Chiron and Aries archetypes and cycles PDF immediately after you purchase that, and any other relevant current webinars, including Saturn and Capricorn, Jupiter and Scorpio, the nodes of Leo, Aquarius, blah, blah, blah. And on the educational webinars page, those are the not time sensitive webinars. So you go take a look at those. We have a complete chakra series. We got Kim Marie's favorite bandwagon, the populist banking solution that you referred to in this presentation. So take advantage of this.
Let me clarify, Leroy. The Uranus and Taurus series is not on sale.
No, that's a future webinar. No, of course that's not on sale. Chiron and Aries, yes. Archetypes and cycles. There's only one that's been posted so far, and that I did include that in the sale just because of a request from an associate.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Any other questions, comments? All right, Mr. Leroy muted himself, which usually means no. So thank you, everyone. This is a free webinar. When you get the link to this, you are welcome to share this with anybody and everybody. And thank you for helping us spread the word. Take a deep breath, pace yourself, zip your lips, listen as much as you want to speak. Count to 100 before you act. All right, everybody. Be safe during Mercury retrograde. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.